Welcome back to Appropriations 101. Today we have Chairman Robert Aderholt from the great state of Alabama. He is an attorney and actually served as a judgeship for a part-time.
I did that for a part-time. I did, yes.
Yeah, so he is one of our most dependable members and does a great job on the committee. He's someone that you may not have heard about because you don't see him a lot on TV. That's because he does his job. He's doing his work. And that takes an awful lot of time to be a chairman of one of these subcommittees, but particularly the Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education Subcommittee, because it has a wide jurisdiction, as you can tell just by the name. It spends about 11% of the discretionary fund, which is, as I've said many times, 28% of the overall spending that the federal government does. Next to defense is the largest appropriation bill in Congress. So he has a wide jurisdiction and spends a lot of time delving into the details of this bill. And part of our job is oversight of these different agencies. And so he has a lot of committee hearings and so forth. And I sit on the committee with him, and he's done a fantastic job of trying to control the spending that this Congress has gotten ourselves into over the last several years. But Robert, tell us a little bit about the Labor, Health, and Human Services budget and education budget. We always call it Labor H. So we always leave eight out of education, but that's a big part of it too.
Education is a big part, but Labor, Health, and Human Services is, of course, the main part of the funding. Overall, the bill is where the spending is for this entire bill is about $185 billion. And as you rightly say, I said earlier, when you take all three departments and all the agencies that's under our committee, you've got the second largest defense, it's only one larger. So $185 billion to decide discretionary money is a lot of money to decide. And so, but obviously there's a lot of money that goes into the Department of Health and Human Services, and which is probably 110 billion goes to that department alone. Then you have the Department of Education, which is about 75 billion, it depends on the year. And then you have about 10 billion approximately that goes in the Department of Labor. Yeah. And those are what the three components, that large components. The Social Security Administration is under our committee jurisdiction as well. But but those three departments alone, like you said, is a big part of the federal spending of federal government. But obviously what we do is we make sure that the department is held accountable, that they spend, they come, ask us for a budget, we look at it, we examine it, and then we see the areas that we need to be, maybe could be cut, and some areas that, they maybe are not doing a good job and maybe some more funding could help. Usually more funding is not the case. Yeah. Usually we're always looking to cut. As a matter of fact, over this last year, we cut 10% from the previous year. So we're making serious cuts in it. But yeah, it is one of the larger bills. And of course, you've been on the subcommittee for many, many years, and how the importance of it. And you're also correct in saying it's one of the more difficult bills to pass because it deals with things that are so personal, folks. Obviously, you've got a lot of pro-life riders that can be attached to it. So the pro-life issue raises its head in that subcommittee. But also, anytime you're dealing with the Department of Education, we're always looking for ways to cut the Department of Education. Yeah. I mean, we don't want to cut education, but we understand, I believe, and I think you're probably in the same category, is that we want to see the money decided on a state-by-state level. We don't want everything decided at some bureaucrat at the Department of Education deciding how somebody from Idaho or somebody from Alabama, from New York, Texas, Rhode Island, every state is different.
Yeah.
And so
I get asked that question all the time about why is the federal government involved in education? We're involved in education because we pass laws that require federal funding to help the local communities, such as IDEA, Individuals with Disability Act, and stuff like that. But once that starts, it just expands and expands and expands. I've had superintendents tell me that 5% of their funding comes from the federal government, and 95% of the rules come from the federal government. And that's the challenge.
Yeah, most of their money, of course, and we try to make, my goal is to try to get the money down to the states, and then let your state the Idaho Department of Education decide how to best educate students in Idaho. So where in Alabama, the students can best the Department of Education in Alabama and our state capital and our state superintendent board members that are elected can decide what's best for our state. But obviously we do have a Department of Education, and there are certain things that parameters that safeguards that it does. It does a good job, but we don't want it to be educating our children from up here in Washington from some bureaucrat.
Yeah, it ought to obviously be from the local level. But with the Department of Health and Human Services, that's a huge department in there, especially when we had COVID going on and stuff. Their importance became primary and stuff. And
so yeah, and you know, of course, I know you've talked a lot about the appropriations process, and you know, when I talk to my constituents and when I talk to them about this process, you know, I tell them it's, you know, the appropriations, it covers every facet of the federal government, every federal department and every federal agency. And we're broken up into those 12 subcommittees, and each subcommittee takes a little slice of the federal budget. Either every department or every agency is in one of those subcommittees. And of course, your subcommittee that you chair has a great amount of jurisdiction as well, and then each of us 12 that chair those 12 subcommittees, you know, we come together and we got to get the total budget. So it is, but obviously every individual bill is very important. And people say, you know, what's the most important subcommittee? There's really no most important subcommittee. Every subcommittee is important because it deals with a different part of a person's life.
And everybody in Congress has a different priority in what is important to them.
Well, that's the hard, and that's what I also tell my constituents, is that you've got 435 members of Congress on the House side that think they know best how to spend that money. You've got 100 members of the Senate who think they know best how to spend the money. And then, of course, you have to have the president sign off and his administration. So that's what makes appropriation bills tough. And like you, I'm honored to serve as chair of one of the subcommittees, and it gives us great opportunity to try to put money where it needs to be, and hopefully at the local level, and make sure we're not spending more than we need to.
Yeah, and as we try to reduce spending in at the federal level in these appropriation bills, and we work hard to try to do that, and to look at how we're spending it, if it's the most efficient way, get the biggest bang for the buck on how we're doing it, for whether we need to change the way things operate or stuff. But what I've been trying to explain through all of these different Appropriation 101's videos is that even though you're 11% of discretionary spending, you're only about 2% of the overall spending of the federal government. So when people think that, you know, you're spending, this is what's driving the debt and everything, it's really not. It's only 2% of the overall spending of that 28% that committee, the 12 appropriation committees funds the federal government.
It's, of course, obviously, that is what is driving us entitlement programs in the country, and that's what, you know, we have to ultimately get a hold of in this country. The appropriation is just a small part, and you know, if we didn't spend a dime on appropriations for military, for anything from the federal level, we would not balance the budget. I mean, we wouldn't even come close.
But when you talk to people about that, they think what we're talking about is taking away their Social Security, or taking away their Medicare. Something. We're not. We're talking about changing it for the future, because the future generation won't have Social Security if we don't fix it at all.
Yeah, and one thing, let me add too about, you know, I said that the Social Security Administration is under our jurisdiction as well. I mean, obviously, we don't allocate money to the Social Security Administration to decide whether people are going to get their Social Security check. That's one of the programs that's by law. And so what we do is make sure those checks get out, make sure they have they're in the mail, and that their people are getting them or receiving those checks on time. And so but the money has already been allocated, and it's according to law, and we don't change that on a year-by-year basis.
Well, you've got one of the more difficult, if not the most difficult, bills to pass in Congress. And as I said at the beginning, it's because it touches people's lives, and it's called the People's Bill, because every program in there touches somebody.
And you're right. Some of our subcommittees, or you know, people maybe if you live in, some state on the East Coast or something, you may not deal with the Department of Interior
Yeah.
on a daily basis. Now, you probably will somewhere in the world, but somewhere in your life, but you're not daily. But Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Education, if you have children, Department of Labor, all of those impact you. So this is one that affects people's lives, as you correctly say.
Yeah, it does. Well, thanks for coming over and talking to us about your subcommittee and the great job you do. No one could do this job better than Robert's been doing it. It's a very, very difficult job that takes an incredible amount of time. So I appreciate all that he does, and thank you.
Well, let me just say, thank you, and let me just say for the work that you do representing Idaho up here. I know that from sitting beside you in subcommittees and in full committees, I know that you take care of your district and your state very well, and you do a great job on the preparations, and it's a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.